What is up, football fans? And I say football fans for a reason because we're going to be talking about the NFL and a little bit of college football on this NFL Whip Around podcast. I'm Jeff Hartman, joined by Coach Kevin Smith. Last year I called you the Grinch, and I take that back. I think you're a Christmas guy. It is the week of Christmas. Merry Christmas. And hey, we're actually recording this on Festivus. I know you're a Seinfeld guy, so happy Festivus.
Oh, thank you. Here's how you know I'm a Christmas guy. Because I threw a full-blown temper tantrum while trying to put my lights up, last week, and it was witnessed by my neighbor. I didn't know it was witnessed by my neighbor, but then I ran into him a few days later. He was like, "I was watching you put your Christmas lights up the other day. You look like you're a little frustrated." I was like, "All right, thanks a lot, buddy." Yeah.
Well, wait a second. So you're putting your Christmas lights up in middle of December?
Well, some of them.
Okay.
All
right.
I looked at the house and I said, we still need something. I couldn't decide what it was. So then ultimately I decided to frustrate myself by, you got to stay in your lane, Jeff. I should have known that if I went too big, I'd run into trouble.
Shoot, man, I put my roof lights up in November and I don't turn them on though. Like I just put them up and people are like, "Oh my gosh, why are you putting your lights up?" And it's like, I don't want to do it when it's freezing cold. And so then my neighbor across the street she was putting her lights up and it was frigid. She goes, "I know now why you put those lights up in November." I'm like, I don't turn them on until December. I just have them up because I don't want to do it in the cold. But nonetheless,
that's far too organized for me, Jeff. Far too organized.
I take my lights serious, man.
I could tell.
All right, so we've got a lot to talk about that doesn't relate to the holiday season, and it is all about playoff football. You have college football's kicking off, and it's in. We are talking about that for sure. NFL is getting down to that time. Before we even talk about a topic, Coach, is there a better time of the year than right now in college football and professional?
This is it, man. This is absolutely. I say to my family, like, look, just plan on the weekends for the next month for us to be in the house watching football. Don't ask me to do anything special. Don't, that's what I'm doing. So they know the deal.
This is the culminating event for both the college football. Let's start there with college football. The college football playoff has officially started. It's the first year of this bracketed tournament. 12 teams get in. Round one is in the books. What were your takeaways? Because I have some strong thoughts, but I'm curious what you think.
I'm sure you do. I know you're not a huge fan of the way the whole thing's been set up, but unfortunately, they were not very good games. And my two big takeaways are this. One, the home field is really going to matter in this first round because you're going to go college campuses. You know the deal, man. They're rabid. You got the band going. You got 100,000 screaming. It's not like NFL fans are good, but when you're shelling out $1,000 a ticket, the truly rabid fans are getting squeezed out by the economics of the NFL game. That's not as true in college. And so there's that, the home field advantage matters. And then I don't want to call them the fringe teams, but the SMUs and the Indianas, and we'll see about Boise and Arizona State. It'll be very interesting to see if the committee continues to value teams like that versus the overall strength of schedule that may have worked in the favor of like an Alabama or an Ole Miss, traditional powers who were sort of squeezed out. If you're Alabama and you watch what happened to SMU and Indiana, you just got to be shaking your head being like, come on. You telling me Alabama was going to get rolled by Penn State? No. So those are my two big takeaways, right? That the committee may need to reevaluate the process next year and that home field matters.
The process is my biggest question because I agree with you when we talked about this last week and you said it's going to be really cool to see SMU, this modern style offense against a traditional Penn State in Happy Valley and all this stuff. And the stories and the narratives going into that are good. They're good for the game. But I said the game has to live up to the hype, and it didn't. It was a dud. From the pick six on, it was over. And even go to Tennessee at Ohio State, that wasn't even a close game either. And so that's an SEC school. And so a lot of people were screaming SEC this, SEC that. Tennessee got rolled by the Ohio State Buckeyes, who are a pretty good football team. Let's not underscore that. I just think that, you talk about the system and the way it's set up. You win your conference, you get a home game. If Boise State gets crushed and Arizona State looks like they're completely outmatched, the NFL, they should be set up like the NFL. College football needs a system in place that says, okay, here's how you get in, here's who hosts games, and it's got to be systematic. I just don't think you can go in with this committee approach that says, well, we think this is a good team and they have this record. Kirk Herbstreit, I don't know if you saw this. This has been making its rounds on social media. And he talked about how fringe fans are the ones that kind of impacted this setup that we have right now. And he thinks the committee needs to take a really good look at, like you said, the Ole Misses and the Alabamas that were left out of the mix. You agree or disagree with his take?
Well, I'm not sure exactly what he was getting at with the lunatic fringe that he was talking
Yeah.
about. Um, I'll tell you what I think is odd. It's odd that you earn a bye, but then you don't get a home game. Like Oregon is the overall number 1 seed, but they have to play their first game against Ohio State in the Rose Bowl. That really nullifies the advantage of being a number 1 seed, because that's a neutral site that Ohio State fans will travel to, rabidly. And so I think this is where they should land ultimately. I think they should land on a 16-team playoff. Everybody plays round 1. The higher seeds get the home game, which you should earn an advantage if you're the higher seed. So you get the home game. And now in round 2, you're down to the field of 8. We can move into the bowls. I mean, I know that they really want to incorporate the bowls, the corporate sponsorships, the money, all that stuff. So why not play round 1 on all the home campuses and then move to the bowls in round 2?
That's a great view. Can they just do that? Like, can they just do that next year? Or is this like a 12?
Is there a contract? I don't know.
That's what I'm curious about, because I don't follow college football as close as I do with the NFL. I just think that eventually, even if you're saying we're going to reward conference champions, can you really say that if you win the SEC, that it is equal to some of these lesser than conferences? I can't say that it is. And so that's where I still think that college football is going to be best if they get a commissioner in place and they get 4 main conferences and basically treat it like the NFL playoffs. Here's the conferences, do it regionally, whatever you want to do. And this is how it's going to work. I just don't think that's going to happen anytime soon, because for some reason, the college football scene is just really, really late to change. Do you like the direction of where it's going, though, with the playoff system compared to what it was when you just had the national championship and there was like a month off in between?
Oh, 100%. It keeps interest. It spreads out the interest. I mean, again, you saw those stadiums. Those places were packed. I mean, school's not even in session, and everybody was packed. It's good for the economics of the region for sure. Every level of football has a real playoff. Yeah, we have real playoffs in my son's 5th and 6th grade league. You got high school playoffs, you got professional playoffs, but college has had this convoluted system forever. And again, it's been, the challenge has been sort of prying control of the game away from the bowls. And those are deep roots, and people don't want to give up the power and influence that they have as a result of running that particular system. So it's been this awkward dance as to try to how to create a playoff system while still integrating the bowls, but they're moving in the right direction. I mean, 12 is better than 4. 4 was better than the BCS nonsense. And I think 16 is kind of really where you ultimately need to land.
All right, so let's talk about real quick before we move on and talk about the National Football League quarterfinal talk. So here's the matchups coming up in the quarterfinals. You have number 5 Texas at Arizona State, or it's a neutral site game, but Texas, Arizona State, Ohio State, Oregon, which you mentioned already, Penn State, Boise State, and Notre Dame, Georgia. Out of those games, which are you most excited to see in the quarterfinals?
Well, I watched the Ohio State Oregon game when they played back in September at Oregon. Unbelievable game. Oregon beat them by a point. That's going to be, to me, the showcase game of the weekend. I think Notre Dame, Georgia's interesting. Now, if Carson Beck, Georgia's quarterback, is out, that really swings that game in Notre Dame's favor. I'm interested in Penn State, Boise State, because Boise is a smash mouth run first team, and I love Ashton Genty, but it'll be interesting to see if they can play that style against a Penn State. And then Arizona State's a nice story. That's my fake alma mater, Arizona State. I got my online master's degree at Arizona State, so fear the fork, baby. Let's go. But I don't know. There'll be a little bit of a litmus test for. These sort of, I don't want to call them second tier teams, but these non-traditional powerhouses in the playoffs.
All right, let's do some predictions quickly. So you have Texas, Arizona State, Ohio State, Oregon. The winners of those two are in the semifinals in that bracket. Who is playing in the semifinals if you're predicting it?
I'll predict Texas, Oregon. I think Ohio State's a really good football team, and I think Ryan Day is maybe coaching for his job. But I think Oregon has been the best team throughout the entire year, and give them 2 weeks to plan for Ohio State, and I think that they'll be ready.
All right, then the other side of the bracket: Penn State, Boise State, Notre Dame, Georgia.
I'll say Notre Dame and Penn State. So you got a lot of so-called road teams, even though these are neutral sites.
So you think Notre Dame's going to beat Georgia?
I just don't. I mean, Carson Beck's not supposed to play. I mean, so
Yeah.
like now you've got their backup quarterback who, I'm sure that if you're the backup at Georgia, you're still probably one of the 30 best college quarterbacks, in the nation. But he hasn't played all year, and he's got to step into a huge spot now.
Notre Dame, Penn State would be for the traditionalists out there that love like the history of college football, the Golden Domers versus Penn State, the uniforms, everything. That would be awesome. That would be awesome. And I don't have a dog in the fight. I really don't care. So, all right.
Imagine on the other side if you get Texas and Ohio State.
Yeah.
If you get Texas, Ohio State, and Notre Dame, Penn State, my gosh, that's a traditionalist fever dream there, man.
All right. Enough college football. Let's talk about the NFL. In the National Football League, oh gosh, Baltimore beat the doors off of Pittsburgh. Not really, but sort of did. And they're top the AFC North at 10-5. That was on Saturday. The Steelers hold the tiebreaker between the two. But are the Steelers winning the division? Let's make something very clear. If the Steelers win their final two games, home on Christmas Day against the Chiefs and home against the Cincinnati Bengals in Week 18, they win the North no matter what the Ravens do. So they still do control their own destiny. How's that going to play out in the AFC North in your opinion, Coach?
You're not going to like what I'm about to say, Jeff. I know
what you're going to say.
I'll get that out up front, right? Jeff, I can actually see a scenario. This would not shock me. The Steelers beat the Chiefs on Christmas Day, circle the wagons, figure out a way. We've seen Pittsburgh do this before. Lose games they're supposed to win games they're supposed to lose. I can see that. But if Cincinnati then beats Denver next week and has to come to Pittsburgh with a chance to make the playoffs, I can see the Steelers losing that last game and losing the division because Joe Burrow and the Bengals beat them in the final week of the regular season. I mean, I'm not saying that's exactly how it's going to go, but it wouldn't shock me if it went down like that.
Yeah, I mean, anymore as a Steeler fan, you're like, yeah, it wouldn't shock me. Now, the Ravens, you look at their road because it's important to note they still have to go to Houston. Yeah. And they play the Texans on Christmas Day, and that's not going to be an easy game. They're on a short week and have to travel. And the NFL at least did these four teams right by making it equal. They both played on They all played on Saturday. They're all playing on Wednesday. It's not fun. It's not great, but it's in this case, at least no one has a glaring advantage. So I think the home teams here on Wednesday have an advantage. If the Ravens lose a game, well, that makes life a lot easier for Pittsburgh, especially if they could steal one against Kansas City. If I were a betting man, I wouldn't bet the Steelers to win the AFC North. If anything, I would say that they lose to Kansas City and they beat the Bengals and they go in and now they're a wild card team. But at the same time, this NFL, and we've seen this and we're going to talk about it in this episode, is upside down. Games that you think are going to be just slam dunks have turned into losses for some teams. Like you look at Philly, Washington. We're going to talk about the game in a second. Who in their right mind would have thought that Philadelphia would have lost? Stuff happens. Injuries happen. Do you think that Pittsburgh is going to beat Kansas City on Wednesday?
I certainly wouldn't bet money on it, but it will not surprise me at all. Simply because stylistically, that's a much better matchup for the Steelers than Philly was 2 weeks ago. And I feel like Pittsburgh, when they come home on Christmas Day, it's a little bit of a chip on their shoulder game. I'd be pissed if I were these guys about having to play at home or even anywhere on Christmas Day, to be quite honest with you. But I think the Steelers revel in being doubted. I think the back against the wall Steelers are my favorite version as opposed to the we got this Steelers. They always seem, when they got a little bit of a chip on their shoulder or some doubters, to be able to respond. So it won't shock me if they beat Kansas City.
I think we talked about the Chiefs on this podcast all season and how they win these one-score games. And they did that again on Saturday against Houston, a one-score game. if you could tell me a team that's like, you know what, we love playing one score games. That's like our favorite way to win. If there's not Kansas City, who is it, Coach?
Oh, it's Pittsburgh.
It's the
I mean,
Pittsburgh
Pittsburgh, yeah.
Steelers. They thrive on this crap, and they're at home, and that crowd's going to be pretty hyped up, and they're going to want to. I mean, it's the defending champions. You always get hyped
Yeah.
up for that game, but there's a lot on the line here, and so
Expect
it's
expect a 20-17 game. Just don't ask me who's winning. So.
it's a coin toss. I mean, you saw it against Baltimore on Saturday. It's the way the ball bounces, and in that game, the ball did not bounce the Steelers' way. They caused 3 fumbles, and they don't recover any of them. You think if they get just one of them, combined with Minka Fitzpatrick's interception, it changes everything. But they didn't. And so if the Steelers are able to take the ball away, Patrick Mahomes has thrown 11 interceptions this season. That's very uncharacteristic. But the Chiefs are tough. Man, they're tough. I watched that game against Houston. They're just so dialed in. And even when they make mistakes, it's just incredible how they come back. Chris Jones' injury, by the way, Coach, is going to be big, is it not?
Yeah, it is for sure. They're built to they are a defense first team. I was just talking with Brian Anthony Davis on our podcast, rattling off some of the scores of Chiefs games. They've won, they got a 17-10 win. They have 2 19-17 wins. They have a 16-14 win. They're winning with defense. And Jones is obviously the anchor of that front. So that's a big subtraction for them.
All right, so let's leave the AFC North for a little bit. And let's go to the NFC North, where Detroit and Minnesota are both 13-2. Detroit has the tiebreaker, but they're going to play each other again in Week 18. Do the Lions hold on to win the North? And is the winner of that division the favorite in the NFC? This is a tough question based on how things played out this past weekend. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so before we get to that Week 18 game, Detroit's got to go to San Francisco, who looks cooked.
Right.
But Minnesota's got to play Green Bay. That's going to be a challenge. Obviously, they need to get past that one. Regardless of what happens in that division, Kevin O'Connell's the NFL Coach of the Year. If he's not the NFL Coach of the Year, I don't know who is. I mean, my gosh, the job that they've done simply with Sam Darnold is phenomenal. Sam Darnold talking last week about how much he's learned simply about reading defenses in his time in Minnesota, meeting with Kevin O'Connell, studying with Brian Flores. He said he never understood defenses the way that he does now. So that he said it's like having a cheat code when you go up to the line of scrimmage and you can read a defense and you know exactly what to expect. He said it's made all the difference in his play. So, I suspect Detroit's going to hold on and win that division, but man, what an amazing job that Minnesota's done.
Yeah, and I'm sure that Mike Tomlin will probably get a couple votes for Coach of the Year, and rightfully so, although he's faded here in the last few weeks. But Kevin O'Connell, by far and away, is the favorite, as he should be. Like you said, when Sam Darnold was the quarterback and J.J. McCarthy gets hurt with a knee injury and he's done for the year, there were people like me that said, hammer the under on 6.5 wins on the Vikings, and they've already won 13 games. I just don't know. Like, there's no one, and I will say that I can fall into this category in a way because I haven't watched a lot of Vikings games this year. No one's giving them an actual shot here, and I don't know why. It's like the Chiefs are winning games and they're ugly at times, but it's the Chiefs, right? They've won a Super Bowl. The Vikings haven't won a Super Bowl, but they're winning football games, Coach. Like, do you think this is a viable contender, or is there some smoke and mirrors here that I'm not aware of?
I think people still doubt Darnold. When you look at everybody talking about favorites, who are we talking about? Well, we're talking about Patrick Mahomes, the quarterback, Josh Allen, the quarterback, Lamar Jackson, Jalen Hurts, right? Now Jared Goff, who I think people have accepted as an upper echelon quarterback, but they have not accepted Sam Darnold. It feels improbable that a guy who has feels like, he flamed out of the league. And then he was just destined to be bouncing around as a career backup, that guy could now be back in the Super Bowl conversation. I think people aren't ready to accept that until they see it in the most meaningful games. And I think the Vikings are fine with that. If you're the Vikings, great, keep doubting us. Let us play like we were just talking about with the Steelers. Let us play with our backs to the wall with that chip on our shoulder.
And Sam Darnold's playing smart football. Like, there are some times where you just throw it to Justin Jefferson. Like, just let him do the job. You just give him a chance. I think this is going to be intriguing to watch down the stretch. This NFC North, that Week 18 game is going to loom large. I'm sure we'll talk about that next week, depending on how things play out here in Week 17. But let's go and stick with the NFC, another team that was thought to be a potential top-seeded team until they get tripped up, the Philadelphia Eagles. Saquon Barkley rushes for 150 yards, and Philadelphia's loss to the Washington Commanders Sunday. He is now 268 yards shy of breaking Eric Dickerson's single-season rushing record, which was set 40 years ago. The Eagles play Dallas and the Giants the final 2 weeks. Can Barkley get there? We'll talk about the results here in DC, if you want to call it DC, Landover, Maryland. But what do you think about Saquon Barkley, Coach?
Yeah, man, he can get there for sure, especially now given Philly's quarterback situation. I don't know what Jalen Hurts' status is exactly, but he left with a concussion. Kenny Pickett comes in, plays fairly well, did enough to lead them to a victory. As a matter of fact, they're winning 33-29, 28, and are ready to put the game away. And Pickett puts a ball right on the money to Devonta Smith, who drops it, and they have to kick a field goal, and that opened the window for Washington to go down the field and win that game. But Pickett, after the game, he's getting x-rays on his ribs. There may be a fracture there. So whatever Philly's doing at the quarterback situation next week, they're not going to be 100% healthy. So what's that mean? They're going to lean on Saquon Barkley. And I don't think the Eagles will game plan specifically to get him the record, but their opponents the final 2 weeks, Dallas and the Giants, are certainly teams that you can roll up some yardage against. So yeah, I would, if I had to bet, I'd say he breaks this record.
See, I didn't look up all the stats in terms of the rushing for the upcoming opponents. Dallas is at least playing tough. They are at least playing tough. But this reminds me of I'm trying to think of the guy's name. He's a running back for the Ravens, was threatening the Eric Dickerson record. This was back in the early 2000s. Jamal Lewis. There you go. And I still remember a Sunday night game, I believe it was against Pittsburgh, and he could break the record. And the Steelers weren't in the playoffs. It might have been 2003, actually, now that I think about it. And they had poor Eric Dickerson. They had a camera on him. They would always pan to him, and he's hoping he doesn't break the record.
100%. You got to do the right thing and be like, yeah, go. But on the inside, you're 100% like, don't break my record.
It was super awkward, and the Steelers sold out to try and stop him, and they did. He didn't break the record against the Steelers. I could see the Cowboys and the Giants saying that if there's one thing we're going to get here, it's not letting him break the record. It's a division rival. We are going to sell out. If they're going to beat us, that's fine, but it's going to be through the air. I'm going to say he doesn't get it. And I think that his performance, and it's not his fault, the Steelers stacked the run against him, and he didn't get a big game against Pittsburgh, and that's setting him up to have to get over 250 yards in the last 2 weeks. I don't think he gets there. I think Eric Dickerson's single-season rushing record, which did not have 17 games, by the way, is safe. I think it is safe. But we'll see. If he's capable. We've seen him break off some huge performances this season. It's going to be really, really difficult to do.
Now, it's interesting, man. You and I had conversations last off season about the devaluing of the running back position and about how, well, a lot of guys in the league now feel as though you can just sort of pluck a dude out of the middle rounds of the draft or even an undrafted free agent and get top production. But it's funny. You put an elite back with an elite offensive line.
Yep.
You get elite results. And I think Philadelphia has proven that this year.
Do you think that now Saquon Barkley's numbers are crazy? We're talking about him potentially breaking the single season rushing record. But if you were to have taken let's say a middle of the road running back and put him behind that offensive line, do you still see tremendous production? Not Saquon Barkley production, but tremendous production? Or do you think this is a very unique marriage between running back and offensive line?
I think this is the best marriage that you could have because of Barkley's style too. You look at what Philly's had in previous years. I mean, they've had a top 5 offensive line in the league now for 3-4 years going, but they've always had sort of a committee or a slasher. They haven't had a guy who I think we forget how fast Saquon Barkley is. He's one of the fastest backs in the league in the open field, but he's also a one cut and go punishing downhill runner. And the marriage of those two, because, Philly likes to play on the perimeter, so they'll get Barkley out on the edge in space. but they'll, when they want to just line up and pound it at you, they'll do that. And then Barkley can go and do those freaking ninja moves that we've seen him pull off a couple times this year, and he does special stuff. I thought the statistic that was the most interesting coming into this season, as a potential for how high the bar could be for Barkley, was this. Last year in New York, he was last in the NFL in yards at which he was contacted, right? Meaning, like, how fast did he get hit once he received the football? He was last in the NFL in that, which tells you that the Giants provided him no run blocking. And Eagles running backs were first in the NFL, meaning they got contacted further beyond the line of scrimmage than any backs in the league. So now you take that guy and you flip him from last to first, what's going to happen? And we're seeing the result.
So let's go back to this past offseason. The three main running backs that moved that are big name players. You had Josh Jacobs go from the Raiders to the Packers. Derrick Henry goes to Baltimore after his time in Tennessee, and Saquon Barkley lands in Philly. Do you think this upcoming offseason we are going to see a different approach to how teams value the running back position, or was that a unique offseason with three elite runners looking for a new home?
Well, potentially this could set a new reality, because those three guys have been the showstoppers, but guys like Tony Pollard in Tennessee or Aaron Jones up in Minnesota, they're having excellent years as well.
Good point.
I think that if you're Najee Harris in Pittsburgh and you've got the opportunity now to potentially go somewhere else, you might look at the success these guys have had and say, hey, I can maybe make more money somewhere else and have good results that extend my career. I think the running back market will be fascinating to watch this offseason.
And I'm sure we'll talk about it once the offseason gets here. But let's talk about our fifth and final topic before we get to our player profile. And it is that Philly-Washington game where Jaden Daniels threw 5 touchdown passes, including the game winner with 6 seconds left to lead the Commanders to a 36-33 win over Saquon Barkley's Philadelphia Eagles. Did Daniels lock up the Rookie of the Year award with his latest late game heroics? What are your thoughts there, Coach?
Done. It's done. Absolutely.
Brock Bowers had a good game, though. Brock Bowers had
but you and I both know Brock Bowers is not winning it because he's not a quarterback.
Correct.
He's toiling for the Las Vegas Raiders in large obscurity. He's a tight end. When's the last time? Oh, well, I shouldn't say the last time, because Kelsey and Gronk, I think, have brought a more of a spotlight to the tight end position.
Sure.
But tight ends are pretty far down the list of guys who get national accolades. And Brock Bowers, if he walked into most people's Christmas dinner, they wouldn't know who he is. He's not a real recognizable figure just yet.
No.
Jaden Daniels, yes, man, he locked it up. He also rushed for 80 yards, and just the way he brought them back in that winning drive, like, he looked like it felt like they were going to score. I watched that drive at my parents' house. We were over there, and there was a whole bunch of people in the room, some Eagles fans in the room. And one of the Eagles fans in the room, my dad's good friend, who's a typical Eagles fan, the sky is always falling. By the time that drive got to midfield, he was like, just end the game now. They're going to win. But it felt like they were going to win. It felt like Jaden Daniels was under control and knew exactly what he wanted to do and where he wanted to go with the ball. He looked like a veteran NFL quarterback who's done this before, and he's not. And that's the thing I think it's kind of remarkable about him.
Jaden Daniels is amazing, and good for the Commanders because they finally have the answer there at the quarterback position for the long term. But can we talk about the Commanders season for a little bit? Because they're in the postseason. I don't think they've clinched a playoff spot yet, but they're likely to make the playoffs, especially after this huge win. Think about some of the crazy games they've had this season. The game against Chicago that seemingly broke the Bears, which was the Hail Mary game. You have the game where they were on the wrong end of things against the Cowboys, where Terry McLaurin has an 87-yard catch and run to give them the lead, and they end up blowing it. Then you have this game against the Philadelphia Eagles, and you're like, oh my gosh. You could even go back to the Pittsburgh game. I believe it was week 9 or 10, where they jump off sides, giving the Steelers a first down, and ices the game. Dan Quinn deserves a lot of credit. We talked about Kevin O'Connell, but I think Dan Quinn should get some votes as well for Coach of the Year for what he's done, because that organization, and I say that intentionally, was a giant mess. And he at least has brought some stability. They have the quarterback now. They can start building around it. I think this Commanders team is just getting started, but what a turbulent year for the Commanders so far.
Yeah, well, I think prying them away from Daniel Snyder
Yep.
has done wonders for that organization. It kind of makes you wonder about like what's going to happen in Dallas when they finally pry the Cowboys away from Jerry Jones. Well, maybe Jerry he'll own them till he dies, and then I don't know.
Exactly.
Does it go to his son, or
Probably.
will they get the ownership group away from the Jones family, or does it just keep going down that? The Davises in Vegas. Sometimes you need to get the organization into the hands of new people. You look at Carolina; they might have arguably the worst owner in the NFL. Could somebody else breathe some new life into them? Because that's what's happened in Washington. Now, obviously, getting the quarterback right, getting the head coach right. They've married the quarterback with a good coordinator, but all that stuff comes from the top. Maybe not literally from the owner, but from the ownership group. They make those hires, they make those calls. So yes, it feels like they've kind of swept out the bad juju in Washington, and they've got new life.
And when you think about that division, Philadelphia is the cream of the crop. We know that. I wouldn't say that Dallas's arrow is pointing up, even if Dak Prescott was healthy. And the Giants are the Giants. Like they are literally at the bottom of the barrel, and it doesn't look like they're coming back from that anytime soon. But I would say the Commanders arrow is pointing straight up. Like if I'm a Commanders fan and I'm around a lot of those people here in the state of Maryland, they are pumped. They don't care if they win a playoff game. They are excited because they see a bright future ahead. And that's something they haven't been able to say probably since Robert Griffin III had his rookie season, which is very similar to what Jaden Daniels is doing for the team right now. So good for the
and
Commanders.
think about this, as I don't know where they'll fall in the playoff seeding, but let's say they come in as the 6th seed. Maybe they go on the road out to the Rams or the Falcons or the Buccaneers. You could see them winning that game. You could see them getting to a divisional round.
They're playing with house money at this point. No one expected them to be there anyways. So go out there. Hey, what the hell? It's been an up and down season anyways. Let's see what we can do. It's going to be interesting. All right, let's finish this up with a player profile. You want to talk about tight end for the LA Rams, Tyler Higbee caught a game-winning catch on Sunday. Go ahead. I'll let you start, Coach.
Yeah, let's shine some love on the tight ends, man.
There you go.
Brock Bowers isn't going to win the Rookie of the Year, but what the hell? Let's talk about Tyler Higbee. This is a pro story, right? Here's a guy who gets drafted back in 2016 out of I can't remember. He went to Middle Tennessee State or Eastern Tennessee, some relatively obscure college like that. He's a 4th round pick, but he's been with the Rams now, for his entire career. He's 9 years into the league. He wins a Super Bowl with the Rams a few years ago. Last year in the playoffs, 4th quarter, suffers an ACL and MCL injury against the Lions in the playoffs. He's been out the entire year, rehabbing that thing. He's 30 years old, 31 years old, and you say to yourself, man, maybe this guy's career is done. You get a severe knee injury like that, you might never come back from it. And he's activated for the first time on Sunday, and lo and behold, he catches the game-winning touchdown pass for the Rams in their game against the Jets. And supposedly, man, the Rams went nuts on the sideline. Like they were just so thrilled for this guy. And he's a guy that's not good. He's not going to make the Hall of Fame. He's not going to be remembered by the vast majority of NFL fans in general. But for the Rams, this is like a glue guy that, like a guy who you just want to root for. He's Steelers fans. He's a Brett Kiesel type figure who just becomes a fixture of a Super Bowl winning team. And it was great to see him, have success after obviously the tough year he's been through.
I think that sometimes we as sports fans, it doesn't matter football or not, we almost dilute major injuries anymore because an ACL tear, which has become commonplace in professional athletics, after surgery, you're talking about a 9 to 10 month recovery, and then those players are back doing what they do. But let's not underscore the emotional, physical task, toll that takes on the body. And for someone that suffered multiple injuries, I think about Tank Dell, the receiver for the Houston Texans, who injured his knee last season, comes back, is having a pretty solid season, getting himself back, legs underneath him. And then that's a bad legs underneath him was a bad use of words there, but still dislocates his kneecap, tears up some ligaments probably. He's looking at a year plus before he's able to be right again. I think that we as fans sometimes are like, he tore his ACL, he'll be fine. Not always. It doesn't always work out that way. And so to see a guy like Higbee who's battled back from those type of injuries, and to, like you said, he's a glue guy. He's not making any lists. He's not on the NFL's top 100 in the offseason or anything like that. It's awesome to see them get rewarded for their hard work and dedication. So I like that. I like that player profile. So, all right, Coach, what's coming up for you with the call sheet this week?
Yeah, man, we're call sheet will drop on Thursday after the Wednesday Christmas games. We'll talk about those games a little bit, about the playoff picture, and we'll do some of our favorite Christmas football memories. Right, so a lot of great Christmas games, both personally and professionally. So we'll revisit some of those.
I also got to ask you, how does it feel to be a retired American citizen?
Well, I have. Let's just say, Jeff, I've transitioned. I've moved from one profession now to another here. Hopefully, we'll have a wonderful long career here at FFSN. But yeah, man, I got to retire after 33 years of teaching, and went out in style, man. They clapped me out as I went running through the hallways like an idiot, slapping five with everybody. And then my final act, Jeff, you'll like this. It was my favorite movie of all time is The Big Lebowski. And I walked it off by firing a bowling ball down the hallway and then exited the building.
I love it. I love it. The AARP magazines are showing up at your front door already. I can feel it.
God, that's depressing.
All right, for Coach. Hey, Merry Christmas, man. I hope you and your family have a great holiday. We'll be talking next week. Everyone, thank you for listening. We'll see you next week on another NFL Whip Round.